Hello viewers, in this video I will explain types of feedback. The feedback is divided into two different categories. First one is intrinsic feedback and second category is extrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback is basically the inherent information about the quality of the performance. Generally, the intrinsic type of feedback is embedded in the disciplinary context of the curriculum and it's developmental in nature. Intrinsic feedback the individual can also obtain from within while completing the activity. As a teacher, whenever and wherever possible, feedback need to be provided to the student. This type of feedback is considered as intrinsic feedback. Another category of feedback is extrinsic feedback. If the teacher is giving verbal comments to the student like good answer, very good or needs improvement, these type of statements in feedback are considered as extrinsic type of feedback. By definition, it is the information supplied about performance of individual by other person, about appropriateness or accuracy of performance. There are different forms of extrinsic feedback. These are positive and negative feedback, reinforcement and punishment feedback, intended and non-intended feedback, evaluative and non-evaluative feedback, corrective feedback, and some form of communication are also act as a feedback such as verbal and symbolic feedback and non-verbal feedback. Now, what is positive and negative feedback? If the teacher is said or providing verbal comment in class, very good, the answer is right. These type of verbal comments are considered as positive feedback. This is basically the information to individual about the correct aspects of their performance, and positive feedback serves to sustain behavior that is appropriate and effective. Whenever possible, the teacher need to increases the opportunities for the student to receive positive feedback. Positive feedback is basically provided wherever the teacher identify the appropriateness of the behavior and activities and consider that the student definitely require a positive remark for this. If the teacher give verbal comments like very poor, you are not right here, these type of feedback or verbal comments are considered as negative feedback. Negative feedback inform students of their incorrect or inappropriate performances. Whenever possible, the teacher need to reduces the number of times the negative feedback is provided to the student. The negative feedback need to be given in moderation. It does not mean that negative feedback is totally eliminated from classroom environment. Negative feedback help to student to identify the incorrect or inappropriate performances and it must be given to the students at time. But teacher must also consider whenever the teacher is providing negative feedback to the student, personal biases are not taken into account. Reinforcement and punishment are the inefficient form of feedback messages because they do not inform students of specific aspect of their responses. When they require a praise or when they require a blame, that is not identified in this type of a feedback. Reinforcement feedback strengthen particular behavior or response. Say for example, if the teacher praises the student all the time or for a single activity, it may increase the chances of the occurrence of the behavior in future also. So, reinforcement feedback is a positive in all sense. Punishment feedback weakens particular behavior or response. Whenever the teacher is providing punishment to the student for inappropriate or incorrect responses, maybe this discourages the learning of the student and also affect the self-esteem of the student. Example of reinforcement feedback is the teacher is providing very positive comment to the student to motivate the student for the aspect of learning. and punishment is given to the student for the inappropriate and incorrect responses. Intended and non-intended feedback is also provided to the student in classroom. Intended feedback is received by the student and interpreted in the same way as the teacher meant it, and teacher need to avoid non-intended feedback. Maybe the student interpret the message of the feedback in some other sense and is not intended by the teacher. If the teacher said good, very good or very poor, means a value judgment is added with the verbal comment. This type of feedback is considered as evaluative feedback. If the teacher said that you scored 17 marks out of 20, the student is not very clear whether the scores are good or not. In such context, the student need to know the score of other students in the class or the specified criteria or standards that is expected by the teacher regarding that scores. So, most feedback in classroom contain element of both evaluative and non-evaluative feedback. Evaluative feedback is the value judgment given by the teacher, and non-evaluative feedback is without any value judgment. If the teacher is giving score or comment, those type of feedbacks are considered as evaluative and non-evaluative feedback. Another form of feedback is corrective feedback. Corrective feedback is basically the extended form of the feedback where the teacher identify the corrective and non-corrective responses submitted by the student along with the actions that need to be taken by the student to correct errors. Different forms of communication also act as a feedback for the student. Say for example, if the teacher is giving verbal comment in the class, that type of feedback is considered as verbal feedback. In verbal feedback, there is a much use of a language, and if the teacher is simply providing number or symbols to the student, that feedback is considered as symbolic feedback. Non-verbal communication is also act as a non-verbal feedback messages for the class. Say for example, if the teacher is smiling, it means the teacher is very happy with the activities that is happening in the class. If the teacher frown, it means the teacher showed displeasure for some of the activities in the class. Sometimes no feedback is also considered as feedback. It is the message to the student that their behavior or their responses are not accepted by the teacher. So, these are the different type of the feedback the teacher can use in classroom. These are the references that I have used to prepare this PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.